I want to get over the school. I haven't been there, you know, but I want to get there.
Well, you should. You should.
Yeah, and then we're going to share some of the history of, well, yourself and also this Henry George is a major figure, apropos of the time, it seems to me.
Yes, absolutely.
And welcome very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program Cay Hehner. And he's the Director of Education for the Henry George School of Social Science here in New York City. We're going to be talking about Henry George and the current state of economic thinking and philosophy and so forth. And Cay, welcome very, very much to Conversation.
Thank you so much, Harold. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this program.
Well, we ran into each other today, had a good conversation with you and Andrew Mazzoli.
Mazzoni, yes.
Mazzoni, a very interesting fellow. And we're going to want to talk about Henry George and then also the current economic situation with the financial difficulties and that sort of thing,
yes.
About him and philosophy and about the school, of course, and the educational patterns you have there. But I wonder if maybe you could, for us, share your own background, please. I know you're a Ph.D.,
yes.
But could you share your own background as a way of wading into the program? Then we'll morph over to Henry George and the school.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You can say I'm handicapped. I have about 10 generations behind me of people who taught, mother's side, father's side. So whatever I can't do teaching, I should be able to do. It's like genetic.
Yes.
And we almost became colleagues. I used to work as a journalist. I got my master's in economics, classic economic theory. David Hume, Adam Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And
where?
That was at the University of Berlin. I'm German-born.
German-born.
Yes.
Cay.
Yeah.
Is a Swedish name.
Yeah, it's a Swedish name, North German Swedish.
Right. Okay.
And then later I got a Ph.D. at the same university, Free University of Berlin, in the ideological origin of the Holocaust.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
That was a long project, almost 12 years. I wouldn't do it again, heavy duty. And I just thought, how come that a cultural nation like Germany got into such a mess?
Absolutely staggeringly significant. I've given a lot of thought necessarily to that over the decades. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. We get a chance. But so you studied in Berlin then?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Free University is a good school, I understand.
Very good. Very good. It's like it's comparable to maybe here in this country the New School or UC Berkeley.
Okay. Good.
Very good programs, good scholarship, and very advanced, very progressive.
And you were studying the social sciences.
Social science, yeah.
And the ideological roots of
the Holocaust.
The Holocaust, yeah.
And in one word, in a nutshell, you have like this is ancient. Anti-Semitism is a very unfortunate long history in Central Europe. Mm-hmm. And Nietzsche is one of the main. The philosopher Nietzsche, the Übermensch, Superman. He's one of the main, I would say, culprits, ideological culprits of that.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's
a form of racism.
Oh, absolutely. It's racism, white supremacism, racism, and Nietzsche is. You could say he's obscene in his philosophy, but he has such a word power.
Yeah, he was really a writer. Yeah.
And he's like in the German language, Goethe, Schiller, 2 or 3 other poets. He has this enormous word power, which carries this putrid philosophy, and that I think contributed to a large extent that people got sort of wrapped into this idea that, I mean, how can one race be better than another race? It's just basically it's a Hicktown philosophy. It's a philosophy you've never been out of town, you've never been out of state, right. So you're xenophobic. You are afraid of anything that's different from what you know. That's the root of this.
Yeah, I wonder. That's very interesting to me. I'm just thinking. Did you ever go to a soccer match?
Yes.
You go to a soccer match, and they will root, and they will tear down the place, and they will do it. We are not, and you see them. We're number one. We're number one.
Exactly.
You have the Olympics. We're number one. There is this sort of thing exhibited in the human experience. This idea that the entity of which you are a part, or the group, is in some way, like I say, even at the level of sports and so forth, is there. Is there something built into human nature that has people break up, and the nation state is relatively recent, but to have an association with your group, there's a thing, Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the wave, and the Star-Spangled Banner. So I'm not so sure it was only, or there's others who have been carried away with a xenophobic kind of attitude that their system is the advanced one, most of the systems. Chinese tend to think that they're very advanced. They have 5,000, all of those. Is that lessen the critique of Mr. Nietzsche or others who think that one particular group is better than another, when it seems to be written into a great deal of human history of one group relating to another?
Yes.
What do you think on that? You've been thinking about the ideological roots.
I think it has a lot to do with scapegoat, looking for a scapegoat. I mean, success has many fathers and failure has none.
Right.
So we had a so-called roaring economy, just to get into the economics. We had a roaring economy for 10 years, apparently so. Jobless recovery and so on. So the people who had got more. And so everybody said, oh, this is capitalism won the Cold War and whatnot. And now we have a blanket failure of the economy, and now you're looking for a scapegoat. And I think that that's like part of the, it's very uncomfortable to say, I failed, I did something wrong, I made a big mistake. It's much easier to say, hey, this guy did it.
Or they blame it. It's scapegoating, yeah. Yeah, that's true. And it's interesting to me, you said 10, 12 years you were engaged with this question of the ideological roots of anti-Semitism, or of that. And that's really an interesting question. I wonder, maybe you could talk, we could deal with it a little bit, because I've been concerned. What, let's say in that case, what was the root of the anti-Semitism that's been so much a part of Central and East Europe for so long, and then came to a culmination in the absurd philosophy being advanced, I mean, from a historical perspective, of Adolf Hitler targeting the Jews. And what kind of a conclusion did you come to? I can't understand where that comes from, or what is that about, and what's the result of your findings? It might be worth a minute or two to talk about that, because it's been a mark of the history, and it's also in the minds of a great number of people as a hallmark that should be addressed and understood. Will you? I mean, you know, could you address it a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, the roots of anti-Semitism go way back 2,000 years. I mean, to the origin of the Judaic and the Christian movement. And with the diaspora, with the fall of Jerusalem in 78, and the Judaic people and the Israelites being sort of spread all over the world, they lost their homeland, and sort of they took on, I mean, the cliche is the Israelites are good with money, but it's not. That's not a first choice. That's like you're being thrown out of your home, so you're looking for a substitute home. So in a sense, in most countries, the Israelites were not allowed to hold property, to hold land and property.
Okay, so why? Why? That's what I'm getting at.
That's a good question. Now, if you're not able to hold land and property, how are you going to function and finance yourself? And so one of the ways of doing that is going into finance. So finance becomes like almost like a substitute homeland. And so rather than say, if you're in the diaspora, if you're in the exodus, you're forced to make yourself at home in other ways. And I think that's, and now if you're successful, if large groups of these expelled people are successful, then what you get, you have the envy syndrome. You have the envy syndrome. You have people who are upset, oh, they are making more money than we are. They are richer than we are. And then that combined with the scapegoat syndrome, and then you get what you have. You said Adolf Hitler. Why did it come to such an absurd culmination? I think you could say Hitler, you can imagine Nietzsche without Hitler, but you cannot imagine Hitler without Nietzsche.
Okay, you go to Nietzsche, the Ubermensch.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole idea of Ubermensch. Is that the same as a group of footballers saying, we are number one? Or, I mean, in essence, in essence. Uber, we're better.
Exactly.
That kind of thing comes into the consciousness of people, and then it takes on political. I've had some people who were looking at Mr. Bush over the last 8 years with great chagrin and so forth, and there were levels being made that it was moving toward a fascism. We have Guantanamo, we have torture, we have a, posse comitatus overlooked, this kind of thing, secrecy. And they said that we were moving toward fascism. They had the mark of the or the tendency for the state and the political, the corporate and the political to be combined, and so forth. But you studied it. In 1933, Hitler was elected in an election.
Yes.
I don't know what his attitude toward the Reichstag fire was. I don't know if they were involved. They certainly took advantage of it.
That was most likely fabricated. That was most likely fabricated.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Okay, I read William Shire. I got it down when I heard David Ray Griffiths talked about it, and he seemed to leave the word. But anyway, by the time 1939, 1940 come, and they were on a rise, and they're coming out of a difficult economic situation.
Yes.
He had a popularity that I think was up in the 80 or 90 percentile among the German people.
Yes.
Mr. Bush had a that. He rode the 9/11 event downtown here, and he did. But now he's going out of office after 8 years, and he's being voted in most polls by pundits and everything as maybe the worst president we've ever had, delivered down this great debt. So there's some hope in the fact. But in Germany, at 95%, I suppose he would have had plummeting rates by the time 1945 rolled around or something. But you understand? What was the difference, and is there any hope in the fact that it's not so easily done in the extreme that he exhibited as extreme fascism, as some people, maybe some people on the left tend to think, or is it not worth talking about? You said it was ideological basis of the anti-Semitism, the rise of Nazism is a question worth having some perspective on.
I'm probably chagrined also about the last 8 years of the Bush administration, but it's too quick to say, you know, we're going into fascism. We can sit here and make anti-Bush jokes and we're going home and nothing happens.
Easy.
If we are doing this in a totalitarian system, Stalinist system or Hitlerist system, we're dead. We're going to the camps. We're literally dead. So there's a big difference.
Yeah, right.
But are there tendencies that go in the wrong direction? I mean, what is it? Since the Age of Enlightenment, we've had the separation of powers and the separation of state and church. Mm-hmm. Now, if we're going, in the old days, before Enlightenment and medieval, before medieval, you had the king who was the head priest, who was the head judge. Mm-hmm. So if this person, combining three powers in one, if he didn't like your nose or my nose, we were dead. Mm-hmm. There was no due process, there was no habeas corpus, there was nothing.
Right.
So we want to go back to status quo ante, to the medieval age and pre-Enlightenment age? No,
I don't.
We don't.
I don't want to go any time before there was anesthetic in the case of a thing.
Or
James Joyce had Daedalus say, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hegel says history is a slaughterhouse.
That's another take on it. Things may be progressing and so forth. But anyway, that's very interesting. I'd like to stay in touch with you over the months ahead and so forth, and maybe we could have talk about this question. It's a huge one I've been interested in and trying to understand, has resonance with Zionism and now Arab. It seems to be the Arab Muslim is now the enemy du jour. It used to be commies, and now it's the Arabs. And it's hard to understand where this all comes from, and it's very important. But we want to talk mostly about Henry George, right?
Yes.
And when did you pick up on that? And you're now Director of Education, and you did some economics. So maybe we could introduce Henry George and his thinking. Wealth and poverty, was it?
Progress and poverty.
Progress and poverty, that's right, Yes. But maybe you could talk a little bit how you became acquainted with Henry George, and then share that with the audience.
It's actually
the person himself.
Yes, if you want, I have to confess, it was by default in a sense, because in the major universities in the States, in the West, you study the major economists: Adam Smith down, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill.
John Stuart Mill you include in there.
Yes, and
brilliant.
You don't really study sort of the maverick economists, and Henry George was considered a maverick economist. So I was working as a journalist in the 90s, I lived in Riverdale. I was working as a journalist in Manhattan, and I'm driving down the Henry Hudson with my station, old Oldsmobile station, wonderful old car.
Yeah.
And I can't turn off the radio quickly enough, WQXR, classical station, and there's an ad. I hate ads, so I was going to turn it off, and I just didn't turn it off. And there was like, Fast enough, thank you.
Whole world could have changed. Your whole life could have changed.
It would have.
Isn't it amazing how life can go that way? Yeah.
So I didn't turn it off fast enough, and there were 2 or 3 sentences. I don't remember the sentences, but something said Henry George School And something in these two sentences caught my fancy.
Right. Okay.
And it was the phone number 212-889-8020. See, I remember.
That still hold?
It still holds. I remember to this.
Say it again.
212-889-8020.
You could set that to Tommy Dorsey, right? To Pennsylvania. Yes. Okay.
There you go. So I got that, and either the same day or the next day, I called and I went to the school. At the school, I ran into then director George Collins.
Okay.
And literally at the door. He was going out of the door to get a coffee or something. So George Collins, one of the great Georgists of all time, starts talking to me. He talked to me for 2 hours, and I'm supposed to know all this stuff because I had studied it. And I didn't know about Henry George, which was embarrassing.
You had studied economics.
I'd studied economics. I studied classical economics, and Henry George is considered the last of the classical economists.
Okay, could we go through that canon a little bit, if you could? Begins with Adam Smith, more or less, modern economics.
Yes, we could.
And then you got Ricardo, comparative advantage.
Yes.
And then you've got, who else have we got in that line?
John Stuart Mill.
John Stuart Mill. Well, I would have thought Alfred Marshall.
Alfred Marshall is a little bit later, but you include him also. But Alfred Marshall goes over to the neoclassical economics.
Okay, and then, but then let's get to Keynes.
Yes.
That's coming up in the more modern, post-Second World War.
That's in the 20th century. So far, the classical economists.
Oh, wait, we forgot Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a major figure.
Oddly enough,
1840.
Thank you. Karl Marx, oddly enough, is a classical economist also.
Okay.
So if we start, Adam Smith's great mentor is David Hume.
Okay, David Hume, part of the Scottish Enlightenment. Yeah.
Thank you. See, he's one of the great Enlightenment philosophers.
Absolutely.
And he also wrote some wonderful essays on economics. And everything that's good in Adam Smith, in 1,000 pages, unreadable Wealth of Nations pages.
Yes.
Everything that's good in the Wealth of Nations, you find in 180 pages of 9 essays on the economy by David Hume.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. There's a book out, I don't know if you've seen it, by a guy named Herman.
Yeah.
I don't know his first name, but he's a serious historian.
Yeah.
And it is titled, and it's serious, it's titled, How the Scots Invented the Modern World and Everything in It, and claims that the Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, is what brought about the major changes that accompanied the industrialization that was coming historically, more than the French or something like that.
That's true.
And it's interesting how and a huge percentage of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence of the United States were Scots.
Oh, really? I didn't
know
that.
Yeah, and David Hume and so forth. But I didn't mean to go off track there.
No, we're not going off track. So we have, with the Enlightenment, with the idea that things are not irrational and things are not just decreed by some priest, king, judge on top of the state, but that human beings are more or less alike. Even kings are alike to ordinary mortals. And what it does is that there was an enormous empowerment. There was an enormous, you can use your reason, and by dint of your reason, you can forge and create and recreate your environment and recreate your own reality. And they started to study trade, and they started to study production, and they started to study manufacture as a sort of as an equalizer. So it's not just it's handed down, the aristocracy handed down landed property from usually primogenitor, meaning from oldest son, from father to oldest son, and then happened. That went on for
1,000 years.
1,000 years at least.
After Rome, yeah.
Exactly. And so then came the Enlightenment, and it burst, and it swept all this old stuff away, French Revolution, American Revolution. I mean, this country is based on these ideas. All the modern democracies are based on these ideas.
And it was very unique at that time, 1770. The steam engine.
Oh, absolutely.
That's Scottish.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you get David Hume and Adam Smith, and they're saying, okay, look at the man. Man is not just a metaphysical entity. They looked at it from the practical perspective, and they said, okay, man is an economic entity. Man is the economic man, Homo economicus. And that was a big step forward. And then we had, just 2 schools back, we had the mercantilists who said all wealth comes from trade and commerce, and we had the physiocrats who said all wealth comes from nature and the land.
Right. And that begins to sound a little Georgist to me. Am I
yes, here you absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's totally. So what Smith did, Smith's great merit is that he systematized the early schools. He took these the ideas, nature and land and trade, and put them together and said, this is all really this is the basis of production. We have three factors of production: land or nature, we have labor, and we have capital. And we put all this together and we make that fruitful for the entrepreneur. We make that fruitful for the capitalist. And capitalist is a very down-to-earth term. Actually, capita is the Latin term for head, and it was how many bulls or cows you had. You were a farmer, and if you had 100 bulls and cows, you were richer than the guy who had only 10 bulls and cows. And if you had 1,000, you were...
Is that where it comes from? I didn't realize. Yeah,
that's where capital comes from. And you have, I mean, these popular terms. We have a bear market right now. We used to have a bull market. Bull market means bull in all cultures throughout history signifies wealth.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Because the more bulls you have, the richer you are. The more meat you have, the more cows you have will give milk, and so on and so forth. That was, wealth was measured. It was very agrarian, very agricultural, very like the farming mentality. And then if you get bears at night that come into your herds of cows and bulls, what do? They diminish your wealth.
Yeah, right.
So that's where this bear and bull market, where this is coming from. And so Smith was really the first who sort of thought systematically with Hume, thought systematically about what are the conditions to create wealth? And before it was just wealth for kings and wealth for the aristocracy. There was no need to study that. It was just passed down. And now it was made like trade happened, more international trade happened, the mercantilists were into that. So it became democratic. If you were a good trader, if you were a smart trader, you could become richer than an aristocrat.
Okay, a bourgeois, or
middle class bourgeois.
Right.
Exactly. So there was in a sense, the birth of the spreading of the bourgeoisie, the spreading of the middle class.
Right.
And then you got the Industrial Revolution, steam engine, Scottish Enlightenment, you said, and you got like the other inventions. You started to have steamboats transported goods across the oceans quicker. You had the steam engine used for railways, and you got steam engines and such for manufacture and for factories.
And laying the predicate for mass production and the whole modern world in which we're coming into.
Thank you. And Smith, of course, one of his great gigs is he discovered, or he thought about the division of labor, separation of labor, assembly line and such things. And now the problem with the Industrial Revolution was, of course, it was a gift that was not without disadvantages, namely the fallout. You had the pollution. You had people in the mines. You had workers...
Satanic mills, Mr. Blake would talk about.
I did not...
Or Dickensian kind of thing.
I did not know that expression, but it's right. That's very good. Satanic mills, in other words, that's like almost like they're hellish conditions.
Absolutely the case.
You have people 10, 14 hours, they're working in the mines for 7 days a week. You have pregnant women working down there. You have kids working down there. And they die like fleas. Or flies. And so... John Stuart Mill was one of the first who said, okay, we've got to do something. It can't just be all for the entrepreneur and for the capitalist. We've got to do something about the workers.
Marx had a couple of things to say about that also.
Piggybacking, so to speak, on Mill, Marx came in and he said, and Marx took the entire system. He took the entire system of Adam Smith, land, labor, capital, the entire classical theory of economics, and he just turned it upside down and he said, we are making this now available to the worker. We're going further down in the process of democracy. Before it was only for the kings and the aristocrats, then it was for the middle class, and now below the middle class there's the underclass, the proletariat, the workers. And if we don't have workers who work for us, we can't create wealth. So that was Marx's big thing. But now the problem with Marx is Marx would use a so-called command economy. He would say, we don't want free market, we don't want competition, we're going to monopolize everything in the hands of the state. And what that unfortunately did, he might have had a good intention with that. He wanted to help the underdog to get into the proletariat, the workers to get into their own right, but what he did with that is he created the old command economy that's like the old tyrant. There's the guy on top who says what's right, and if he doesn't like your nose, you're dead.
Or they could do away with what would be seen as like the private sector.
Exactly.
In order, because the private property ownership of things or assets was seen to be the problem in terms of the injustice that exists in the world.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, it gets to Stalin where they had collectivization and that kind of stuff, and you end up with all power in the hands of a small group, nomenklatura, and they would be oppressive or could be also in a certain way in a fascist system. They seem to have, even though there are clashes with each other, there's that debate going on. We're getting a little bit ahead in a sense because that's into the modern period. George, Henry George, was born, maybe we could talk about the man himself. He was born in Philadelphia, I think, in about 1870 or something like that?
1839.
So early. I didn't realize so early. Okay.
He's really, his life parallels Karl Marx. I just want to say one last word about Karl Marx. So what we did is, or what Marx did actually, because he thought this is good for the worker, I created command economy, I created dictatorship of the proletariat, and what it did away with the separations of powers, and in a sense it did away with the church of state separation. Church and state separation, because the state ideology of Marxism can be considered a substitute religion. Yeah,
and it's also, religion is the opiate of the people. Right.
But then
and there's truth to that.
There's absolute truth to it, but now you have the great Führer, the great chairman of the people, like Stalin. He all of a sudden had the power of the judge, the priest, the head judge, the head priest, and the head executive man.
That's heady stuff.
That's where we get into gulags. That's where we go into gulags, into camps, and so on and so forth. So there was no checks and balances, no more due process, no legal system that could counteract this.
Not only a legal system, but even a private sector that is apart from the control of those who have all power concentrated in one group is a little bit dangerous, to put it mildly.
Thank you.
And that's there.
So for Marx,
some people would have said that power is now going over into the into the capitalists, and they are the rulers. And we had the period that Teddy Roosevelt had to address with the reform, the progressive movement, because you had the trusts and that sort of thing, and the monopoly capitalism was a problem, and that's part of the history or the context into which Henry George was born. I guess, right?
And that actually, George, if you want, he cut the Gordian knot of, I mean, the Marxists said private sector is bad, competition is bad, that's the root of all evil. And
private property ownership is
bad. Exactly. That's
so
Marx.
It'll all be owned by us.
Exactly.
And that us wasn't really defined too terribly clearly. And in some cases, they would, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need.
Absolutely.
But their need would be that they only needed 1/4 cup of gruel to survive, or it would be determined, and they never could deal with anything like, for instance, reasonable wants, as well as just bare needs and so forth.
Thank you.
The name, do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So it was really a subsistence economy, and everything is owned by us. Practically meant just the guys on top, the commissars.
Yeah, right.
They determine, and you get one set of shoestrings for 3 years, and one tie, and that's it. And in the Russian Revolution, they would share shoes. Like if I have size 13, I have to share shoes with a guy who is size 10. That's absurd.
A shoe is a shoe. But there wasn't much concern for anything like individuality and that sort of thing.
Thank you. So there was no differentiation. And then the private sector, or the capitalist system as envisioned by Adam Smith, was freedom of the individual and total market freedom, freedom of choice, and so on and so forth. And so between these two systems, you had George come in, and he said, George grew up in Philadelphia. His father was a book publisher. His father was a customs inspector at one time, and he left school at 14. That was it was Mark Twain, it was Jack London, it was all these self-made men. So he left school at 14. He went around the world twice as a foremast boy.
Yeah, that's right.
He jumped ship in San Francisco. And there was the gold rush, El Dorado. So he went up to whatever, Yukon Valley, God knows, and fortunately for us, for posterity, he didn't find one nugget of gold. Because if he had, he looked for a year.
He would have relaxed into comfort, and we would have never heard the rest.
Thank you. He would have never written a book. So he came home poorer than he was when he went into the gold rush. And he started odd jobs and menial jobs, and then he went into printing. And from printing, he worked his way up into into becoming an editor. He wrote letters to newspapers. He became an editor-in-chief, and he ran the San Francisco Post, an influential paper at the West Coast. He ran that for 5 years, and he saw the social issues. He saw the social injustice. And something happened that's actually unique in the history of the world. George saw San Francisco, the San Francisco area, the California area, grow over the period of 25 years, one generation. He saw this area grow from a couple of fishing villages and mud huts, grow into a vast trading center that served the whole Pacific Rim.
And I think he asked somebody out there, how much is that land worth? And the man said it's worth so much, and it dawned on him that the land had something to do with everything.
That's his.
Is that correct?
That's absolutely wonderful.
Okay.
That's the epiphany. The epiphany was basically, it's like the history of the world was condensed into an accelerated motion piece of 25 years. And George, as the head editor of a head paper in San Francisco area, Bay Area, had the brains to digest that, to analyze it, and leave us a book in which he analyzes this. And he was writing out in the hills of San Francisco exactly you come up with the right moment in George's life. He's writing out, and he's asking the next guy, the cowboy who's over there, he's saying, who does this land belong? And they're like, the cows are on the horizon, they're as small as mice. It was so much land.
Right.
And the cowboy says, this belongs to one big landowner.
Right.
Latifundista, whatever.
Yeah.
And George had this epiphany, my God, we're never going to have social justice, we're never going to have wealth for all if we allow the monopolization of land and resources to such a degree.
Okay.
Because you're saying when you come from the old world, when you come from other parts of the world, and American Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, it was considered, America was considered the land of unlimited opportunities.
Yeah, from many parts of the world thought that.
Exactly,
yeah.
and in the sense,
and it was in a real
absolutely, it was
an open continent.
Yes, as long as there was free land. But the moment in the 1870s and the 1880s, when the last land was taken, so to speak.
Well, they had the Homestead Acts, which really dispensed ownership in a very sizable way, didn't it?
Thank you. The
took it from the Indians, though, I believe.
Well, that's the problem with it. I mean, you have the ethnic discrimination there. But the basic idea of the Homestead Act, 1862, thank you, that's a very important part in George's thinking. It's a very important part in the history of this country. Homestead Act meant you and I, we're, let's say we're immigrant settlers, we're coming from, in the 1860s, we're coming from Europe or something.
Scandinavia or Germany.
For instance, Scotland. We're going down on Ellis Island, with nothing, or almost nothing. We rent ourselves a couple of horses, we take a couple of stakes, long poles, and we go out, we ride out to some free land has not been taken. We ride out in the morning east, stake our claim, ride out south at noon, stake our claim, ride out west in the evening, stake our claim, and this, today you say stakeholders. That comes from it.
I hadn't thought of that.
But that's
where it comes
from? That's where it originally comes from.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
So that was our stakes. These were our stakes, and whatever area we could stake in one day, the government gave to us, provided we would work it.
Yeah, that's
provided we would cultivate it.
Why do I have it in mind, 160 acres or something? Was there 160 acres was a lot or something? And they had the Sooners in Oklahoma would race to get out there first and that kind of stuff.
Yes, and so that was the Homesteading Act meant basically the earth is for the people. Now, Georgism in 3 sentences or in 10 seconds and 20 seconds, all human beings have a right to live. Right? All human beings have a right to live.
That's a good beginning, isn't it, in terms of some human right? Yeah, right.
All human beings have a right to live. We go back to that in a moment. That's the premise, the major premise. No one can live without land or natural resources.
Okay.
If somebody deprives us of the air we're breathing now, we're dead in 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If we don't have water or liquids to drink, we're dead in 3 days, 5 days.
Yeah.
If we don't have foodstuff to eat, we're dead in a couple of weeks or months.
Right.
If we don't have, look at New York winters, blizzards, whatnot, if we don't have shelter and clothing, we're dead overnight.
Can we? Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So in other words, the condition of human life is that we have to have access to natural resources. So now if you put the two together, major premise, all human beings have a right to live, minor premise is no one can live without resources, then the conclusion must be all human beings have a right to have access to natural resources. That's Henry George. And
natural resources, land.
Starting with land.
That includes mineral rights?
It includes mineral rights, it includes air, it includes water, it includes ore, it includes oil, it includes all natural treasures.
Now, in a thing, they would have a claim to that. They'd have a legal claim to that, a title, a claim, a piece of paper that makes that. That could be comparable to, let's say, because when you think about Adam Smith and so forth, in that time, there was nothing like what you would call manufacturing. There was no factories. There was no mass production. There was nothing. It was a guild. It was an agricultural thing, and we're building up. But then, or a railroad, and then so you got land. I understand that. So you can have access to land, which was a great thing. At Turner with the Great Frontier and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But then, why only land? Land would you'd have a title to, and then you'd have a comparable thing when you had an industrial base building up, that you would have other things other than natural resources like land or minerals or something, but you would have what would be included in, let's say, buildings and you know, factories and things where there would be capital assets.
That's a very important.
Why would they not expand the ownership of the capital aspects to the economy that was growing and is growing in the modern experience, and limit it only to land and resources?
Well, that's a very crucial question, and that's the point where
and that would be a private property ownership.
Yes.
Yes, see, you have rights to that.
Yes, absolutely.
And it can't be violated.
Yes,
It's within the
absolutely.
law. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And why wouldn't they build that into, let's say, to the right to the home, to capital assets that represent the economy as a whole, including land and other resources as well? And I'm referencing a Mr. Kelso that I like in terms of economic theory. And we should be addressing economic theory because the whole thing's up for grabs now. The economy's been hit upside the head, and everybody's wondering what the hell is going on and what are the basic premises by which we're going to organize this planet in terms of economic theory. Are they not?
Yes. So we could say, if we want to classify, just to simplify for simplicity's sake, for clarity's sake a little bit, communism says no private property, everything is owned by us or the state.
That's right.
Ultimately, the Politkommissar...
And they're supposed to represent the people.
Yes, and if they don't like our ties, we go to the gulag. So, capitalism says, on the other hand, public sector is suspicious, public sector is awful, government, no government is the best government, little government is okay.
That's laissez-faire.
Yeah, thank you. Smith, big government is the devil. Big government is bad.
I'd associate laissez-faire with Friedman or something. We get up into the modern...
That's neo-Smithian, neoclassical.
Okay.
So, and in between you have Henry George, who says, now you have to differentiate. Land is in the language of the classical economist means all resources. So George says, what you do not produce is not yours.
Okay.
Air is not produced by man, water is not produced by man. That's the original nature stuff that we're dealing with. That's the basis of production. But that's not ownable in a sense because it's not produced by anybody. Now, anything that you or I produce is ours entirely. And
we don't produce the ground. We don't produce the earth.
Exactly. We do not produce the earth.
But we do own it under a Georgian thing, a private property ownership of a specific plot of land we own, and it's ours to do with as we will.
Yes, but George says just untaxed production, go away from production. If we produce anything we produce and we were being taxed on this production 30%, let's say.
Okay.
That diminishes our productive capacity 30%. In other words, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So George says, untax all this, complete tax cut, complete no taxes. George is, in a sense, a no-tax policy. And the only thing, where are we getting our infrastructure, our medical services, our educational services, community services, where are we getting this from?
Getting up to modern experience now.
Yes, where are we getting this from? We're getting this from a user's fee on land. Give you one or two current examples. Wyoming. Wyoming had they found a lot of natural gas deposits. It was a big article in the Times 2 or 3 years ago. So companies come from out of state, from out of the country, to go to Wyoming to exploit the natural gas deposits because oil was going through the roof, so people are looking for alternative energy sources. So what happens now? The Wyoming legislature is not Georgist, but they're not stupid. So they said, we're not going to give this away to out-of-staters, out-of-towners, out-of-the-country people without having them pay us a hefty tax on the natural resources. That's a Georgist measure. Now, this tax was so brought in so much revenue that the state legislature of Wyoming could institute higher education, college and university education for free, no cost at all.
Right.
That's a Georgist idea. You untax production and you just tax natural resources. Alaska, same example. Alaska they have the citizens' dividend. If you and I were citizens of Alaska, at the end of the year, next week, we're getting what, a couple of $1,000 users fee from the oil companies, because the oil revenues in Alaska are so high that every citizen of Alaska gets money back at the end of the year.
They do indeed, and they also get back by having an ownership stake in the pipeline, which is a piece of technology. It's not the resource, it's the technology that makes the resource available.
Now we get into Kelso. Now we get into
Well,
Kelso.
that would be doing. One thing I want to say, Cay, is we have a little DVD of you talking that summarizes some of this. Do you think this, we got about 20 minutes left. This might be a time to run it?
Perfect.
And maybe you could set it up, as they say, where is you talking on these issues at a group or something, and we could set that up and run it then.
Thank you. What happened was in the year 2005, I'd become director of the Henry George School. I'd become director a year before, 2004. I'd been a teacher at the Henry George School, volunteers teacher for a couple of years in the 90s.
That's the Henry George School for Social Science.
Henry George School of Social Science that picked up Henry George's ideas in philosophy. And I was invited to the American Monetary Institute conference in Chicago in September, end of September 2005. And people are asking about what's the viability of our economy? How viable is the capitalist system?
That's a question that's coming even more before us now, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I said 3.5 years ago, three years and a quarter ago, and that's why it's interesting to run the tape from that time, I said, I've seen the capitalist system fall, and we're going to see... sorry, thank you. We're going to... I've seen the communist system fall. I've seen the Iron Curtain fall in Berlin, and in less than 10 years, we're going to see this system fall.
And you were projecting Georgist ideas to come to that conclusion?
Yes.
Okay, well, it's a little talk you're giving there then. So we're talking now with Cay, and maybe we could set that up in the studio. What does it run, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes?
No, less even.
Less than that. But let's run that up where you made a prediction that'd be worth talking about, again, from the Georgist School of Social Science. So let's run that tape now then, please. Thank you very much.
I was in Berlin at the time. I saw the wall coming down with my 2 eyes. And people say, oh, the Georgists are old, there are no newcomers in Georgism, and we're going to die out and then nothing's happening. I don't think so. I think we in our lifetime, I'm 50, I don't think it's going to take 10 years. We're going to see this system we're in come down with a big crash. We've seen New Orleans, we have seen one of the most arrogant presidents in the United States, America history.
That was the piece that we wanted to do. You were predicting that 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
You saw it coming. There were some others, I think, or have said that.
Yeah.
William Greider's done that, and others, Francis Fox Piven, others of all stripes. And it's caught a lot of us unawares, hasn't it?
Yeah,
Mr.
absolutely.
Paulson came up with his 3 pages of fundamental transformation of everything he wanted enacted within a week, and on the president signed, and it seems to go through. And this whole thing that we're in the throes of now.
Yeah.
You could see it coming.
Now, I think
because of the basic fundamental injustice of it, or in unpracticality of the system was in place. And is that root and branch the capitalist history, or was it just that we had a takeover, like Naomi Klein writes very well,
disaster capitalism.
But she would disaster capitalism and that sort of. But she would, in a certain sense, be critiquing the fact that the Chicago school, Mr. Friedman, and the laissez-faire had taken over. But it still leaves us with, where in the hell do we go from here in terms of the economic theory? Do we go back to the Marxian roots? There are some Marxians. Do we go to what are the principles that are involved that could understand what's going on now? And more important, set a template for where do we go from here? And these are questions that have a Georgist interpretation. I presume you do.
Yes, absolutely.
As I do, with a Calzonian one about what it is.
Yes.
But maybe we could get to that in a forward or future-looking vein now in this conversation.
Now, if we go back to the origin of classical economics, we find the original principles, original factors of production, we said, are land, labor, and capital. And now Smith and Marx are both making the same mistake. They're saying it's a three-factor economy, land, labor, capital. But then for all practical purposes, they forget land, meaning they forget the most important factor, natural resources. They exclude it from the equation, and they only work with labor and capital. And
saying that the resources or the natural resources are just part of capital.
Then, exactly, thank you.
That's what they would say.
Thank you. That's
you can own the land, you can own the air rights, you can own the oil wells.
It's all included under capital. It's subsumed under capital. And in this way, they're excluding the most important factor that is necessary to create wealth. And then there's another big misunderstanding, and both Smith and Marx are making this, they're engaged in this misunderstanding. Is money wealth? Money is not wealth. Money is a
claim on wealth.
Thank you. It's an indicator of wealth.
Yeah.
It's a facilitator of trade. But money in itself is not wealth. In other words, if we are stuck, if we get we crash on an island like Hanks in Castaway, we crash on an island and we are stuck there. There's nothing on the island, and we have a suitcase with $100 bills. What does that help us?
Could get a fire started, maybe, you know.
There you go.
Get some,
But it doesn't help us to buy anything because there's no production going on.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
And part of the problem that we had in over the last years, the housing bubble, the subprime crisis, the financial sector was so overblown and so overrated. You almost have, it's like pulling rabbits out of a top hat. In economics, you can't do that, because if you don't have a natural reason, you can't create something out of nothing, in other words.
But what about this thing about, again, I put it to you a little differently when I was saying there's natural resources, but why aren't natural resources just part of capital? As part of the non-human part of the productive process?
Good question.
With a due respect, it seems to me a good deal of most all traditional, classical, neoclassical, neoliberal, up until you know, neoconservative or something, they assume this theory or thinking of economics, the labor theory of value.
Yes. And
that it's human labor or human application that creates value.
That's very important.
And now we're coming to a time of robots and technology where there are these extensions of consciousness. And it's not just land and raw materials, iron, steel, you know, coal and that kind of thing. It's also all the other aspects of a modern and even a postmodern economy that are capital assets, and the capital assets are all owned by a tiny class, even though they're mutual funds and so forth. But the ownership of that, and more important, the input to actual production of labor, which might have been 90% at the time of Thomas Jefferson, is probably down to only about 10% now in the modern economy. And the capital assets that are producing the wealth, automated factories, combine machines that go across and create great things, those are all owned by a small group of people, but they're not having to do with the natural resource base or the land base. It has to do with a whole lot of other applications of the creation of technology and other systems of production, which can be owned by private property, or they can be socialized or something. But that's part of the modern experience, isn't it? I don't quite understand the application or the thinking of resources like land and minerals or something, apart from all of what are capital assets and the basic assumption, capital and labor. And labor is the way in which we distribute all income to everybody, and it isn't really contributing to production, and that which is creating production is all owned by a tiny group of people, so you don't have any demand to be able to clear the market, even if the factories can turn out massive amounts of production of goods and services that would be of great value to the human society. I don't know. I don't want to get too far afield.
No. That's a very good point. It's a very good point, very important, crucial point. You need to... I mean, there's a very simple distinction. It has to do with earned and unearned income. And it has to do with what is produced by man should be owned by man. Henry George is very adamant about that, about ownership. You own the fruits of your labor. You and nobody else owns the fruit of your labor. If you worked for it by the sweat of your brow, it's yours.
What if you own a factory that has nobody. A combine now goes across the fields of Kansas and creates billions of grains of wheat.
Okay.
And there's not even a driver driving the damn thing. You don't have any labor input to when you got to that point. There was labor in making it, but there's no labor input at all. So how can you justify transferring income to people by their labor input when it's a machine that is doing the whole damn thing? And you've got whole factories. You got whole factories that there's not a single person working in, and that's the observable trend into the future if we're going to get into nanotechnology and all these things.
Good
so
point.
That would be, he was informed by the labor theory of value that human beings make wealth and that is earned income. If you own the combine machine that does that, it's unearned and illegitimate by some rules of the universe or how? I don't understand.
No. There's a misunderstanding.
Yes, by me.
No, not by you, but there's a general misunderstanding, and the classical economists have that pretty straight, actually. Mm. We could have avoided the Cold War. We could have avoided this whole fighting of the two systems, capitalism of communism, if that had been properly understood or generally understood. Capital, unlike Marx says, is not antagonistic to labor. Capital is not like some weird zombie-like ET thing out there coming from some other planet, and labor is like something else. In the theory of the classical economists, all economists agree on that, all classical economists, capital is nothing but store labor. For a moment, forget financial capital. Just think of productive capital. Capital are tangible goods, they're tools, it's technology. Well, so in other words, capital is yesterday's labor, last week's labor, last year's labor. It's your stock, it's your inventory.
Well, the Marxists call it congealed labor.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's congealed labor.
It's the labor theory of value.
Yes, it's another state of the same thing. It's like water as ice or water as evaporating in vapor or something. So if we are clear on that labor and capital are the same thing in two different stages.
I'm not clear on that.
Well, but the classical economists are.
Yeah, but there's classical, there's neoliberal, then you had Mr. Keynes.
Yes.
And you had a lot of things other than just the classical.
Yes.
As technology advanced, and the whole trend is for less and less labor input. You drive a great big oil tanker with one man driving it, there's all kinds of models that the labor input to production is reducing all the time vis-a-vis all other aspects of production.
Let's get into
that can be owned.
Let's get into the robot thing now.
All right.
Let's get into the future. Now, what is the economy for? The economy is for the satisfaction of needs. First of all, basic needs, and then higher needs and desires.
Well, Adam Smith said it is for consumption.
Same thing.
And that you can do that.
Consume. You need as a human being. We have 6.6 billion people on the planet.
Heading for 10, I think, about 2020.
Thank you.
If we don't blow the whole thing up.
So you have, let's say, 10 billion people who need food, shelter, and clothing, air and water, and other things. And then this is just the basic Maslow's pyramid of needs. You have the basic needs that you have to satisfy first. We couldn't sit here and reason with each other, have a reasonable discussion if we hadn't had a good steak last night or something, if we hadn't had a fairly good night's sleep, and so on and so forth. There's certain material conditions. It's a fairly heated room and so on. There's certain material conditions that allow us to do this here. Mm-hmm. So basic needs first. So there is a need of 10 billion people that needs to be satisfied, and robots have lesser needs. So the economy is there to satisfy human needs. And even if you have big oil tankers that have only one person, there needs to be maintenance. There need to be computer programmers. There need to be people who put, again, labor into it.
Yeah, okay, I understand that.
So you'll never have an economy that is completely devoid of the factor of labor.
Not completely devoid of labor input to production, but the observable trend is less and less and less.
But that means we should have...
But in Tom Jefferson's time, 90% of production was labor.
So,
and I'm not making a differentiation between management and labor, or intellectual or physical.
Thank you.
But the human beings are becoming... And Lord Keynes, if I may, in his famous letter to his grandchildren, said, you are going to be confronted, it's about now, you are going to be confronted, it's hard for you to realize, because all income is distributed to the people through labor. criteria. They call them jobs.
Yes.
That's the way people do to get money in order to buy bread and milk and things like that. They have what they call a job, a labor relationship. Lord Keynes said, you're going to be confronted, his letter to our grandchildren, that's about now, with massive technologically induced unemployment. You have a productive capability that doesn't need people. They get in the way. And yet we distribute all income to the people through what they call a job.
Now we're going back.
And they're going to be unemployment, and it's because they don't share any of the wealth of the ownership of that combine.
Thank you. So
It is producing the wealth.
we're coming back to.
You understand?
Yes, very, very
And
valid
that's
point.
called, if you get money for something that you haven't worked for, like in a sense of a job, that's called unearned income. They've had ads where if you own the robot, if you own the combine, aren't you entitled to some return for, or let's say one little part of that robot, or that combine, you have a source of income that allows you to buy what they're able to produce. You have demand, you have capital formation and simulfinancing. You have capital accumulation and demand in tandem rather than on some seesaw thing, it seems to me. And that includes all productive capability. We may have to liberate the people from wage slavery.
Now, that's a very valid point you raise. If we go back and look at the contrast between monopoly and competition, and if we keep in mind that the economy is there to serve basic human needs, is not there to serve robot needs. We are not there to slave for the machines. The slaves are there, the machines are there to facilitate our work. In other words,
free us to be concerned to free us to be concerned with the goods of civilization, like art and all the things we can do rather than stand on an assembly line when a robot could be doing it.
Higher needs,
And now they're going to create jobs. You can create jobs to the end of time
and what we are doing here right now, in the classical sense of the economist, in the sense of the classical economist, is we are engaged in labor. We are providing a public service. That's labor in the definition of the classical economist. We're not doing nothing. We're doing something very important.
You mean you and I?
Yes.
Oh, we're talking.
And everybody else, the cameraman, the whole studio around us, they're all engaged in labor. Say Donald Trump, when he works as a manager in his office, he engages, in the sense of the classical economist, he engages in labor. So you have production and services. And the services sector, of course, is increasing. And the services sector goes into culture, goes into art, goes into literature, goes into movies.
But it would corrupt it. Why can't you let the people be having a source of income so that they can do what they want to do without having to answer to some ownership class of what is allowed to be without censorship and so on? If you free the people, they will be able to do what they want, and it might mean, if you get them in touch with the way things are produced, they could be liberated from the constraints that are put on them by where all the assets are owned by a tiny plutocratic class, the banking class, and they have no freedom to do other than the template that the bankers set and the systems that they'll finance and so forth. Well, the people might have a renaissance of freedom.
We could
but we can't.